In this video, we're going to take a look at top RxJS operators that you should know in Angular. So at this point, I assume that you should know what is RxJS and what is Angular, and you should be pretty familiar with those tools. RxJS is not limited to Angular, obviously. Like you can use RxJS in other frameworks and other libraries, but in this video, we're just going to focus on Angular with RxJS instead. And if we take a look at the npm package here, you can see that RxJS is very, very popular. Okay, so we get around basically 22 millions per weekly download. So 20 millions above. And then the version that we're using is 6.6.3. And then there's also some details that you can read for RxJS. So let's get into the top operator that you should know in RxJS in Angular. So for the first one, to use of and from. So basically, we use of operator from RxJS when we want to turn a variable into a observable. So in this case, if we want to, here in the ng on init, we basically create a bird instance from the animal class, and then we initialize the bird.name, which is equal to bird, and then here in the get bird using of, so of operator basically pass in the instance of the animal, and then we basically say this.bird is equal to, so you can see this.bird is a observable animal, so it's observable, and then what we can do is we can turn this variable into observable by using of operator, and this of operator basically converts this, basically, where is it? Yeah, this one. So basically converts this instance into an observable so that we can use this, so we can subscribe to this observable. So this.bird.subscribe, so we can be able to get this. And then to experience that, let's try to get bird from using of. And now if we refresh, now you can see bird from a variable. Okay, and we can use from. So from basically can turn a promise into observable. So here, same thing, we pass in the instance of the bird, instance of the animal, and then inside this method, we basically have a promise. So promise.resolve, and we pass in the bird. Basically, this is just a promise, and you can see the type is a promise animal. So bird promise, and then what's going to happen is we can, instead of using of, we can use from to convert a promise into observable. And if we change this to of, you can see that it will give us an error because type observable promise animal is not assigned to type observable animal. So right now it's just a promise. So we cannot change, so we cannot assign like observable promise, type observable, type promise, and to a observable animal. So in that case, we have to convert this into from. So this way, we can be able to convert to observable animal. And then now, if we save, and then let's try to change this to get bird using from. Now you can see we have bird from promise. So this is how we use of and from. So now let's talk about map and tab. So here you can see that we have a basically in the ng on init, we call this method called get user. Basically, it's a return a observable string, and then we subscribe. So after it returns this result, we basically assign this.user is equal to this result, and then we just display it in our template in HTML. So in this case, obviously we're not going, in real life scenario, we're going to make like HTTP calls to like backend or like database API or whatever. Obviously we're not going to have it in our component. We usually have it in our services, but in this case, I'm just for demonstration purposes, like we going to like pretend that we are getting a observable string and we subscribe to it, and then we just display it in our UI, in our client side. Now here you can see we have, let's say if we want to, in our, like, pretend this is like our backend services, like our like front-end services, we want to change the data. So instead of like we want just to display Eric like this, we want to change the data. We want to change the data to add Eric, so like an @ sign before the string. So what we can do is we can use map. So map basically change the data before we subscribe. So imagine that those methods are inside the services, and this we're calling it from the service, right? Services. So we're calling it from this, like the user service or whatever, and then we subscribe to it. So, and there could be like other components that also call this method from this user services. So we want to, we don't want to change everything in each and individual component. We want to change it inside the services. So what we can do is before we pass to this, allow them to subscribe, we can be able to change the data before they subscribe. So in the pipe, we have a map operator from the RxJS operators. We basically add a @ sign and then plus the x. So x basically is the data, right? Is the string. So this is basically the string that we passed in from the that was returned from the get user. So now once we edit, we can be able to change this to using map. Okay, so now what's going to happen is you can see an @ sign at the before the string or before Eric in this case. So this basically using map basically sorry, I mean like the map operator basically change the data before we subscribe. And then we also have a tab operator. This tab operator change data cannot be able to change data before subscribe. So it's kind of like the opposite of the map. Basically here you can see that same thing, we basically change the map to tab. And now if I change this to using tab and then save, it will not change anything. So using tab basically allows us to not change anything, not change the content that was passed from the observable. And then basically what we can do in this case, we can be able to like, for example, we use tab for like getting the data. For example, if in the services, if we want to like store that data that was returned, we can use tab to store that data. And this way we won't, it will be basically like create this this safety bar. Basically, we cannot change anything that's returned from the observable. So this is the difference between map and tab. So now I want to talk about SwitchMap. So SwitchMap allows you to cancel one observable and switch to another observable. So here you can see we have this will be very useful if we want to like merge two collections of data, or just merge two data in general, or like do something with data that was returned from different requests. So for example, here you can see we have a basically in the ng on init, we are calling this get comment users method. So we're just calling this method and returns observable of I comment users. And what we're trying to do is we have a method basically get user, which get a list of I user. We also have a method called get comments, basically gets a list of I comments in observable form, of course. And then what's going to happen is we want to use this switch map, basically merge those, basically a list of I users and I comment, a list of I comments together as one. So going to return into I comment user. So it's going to be very useful. Obviously, like if you have a backend, you can change what you want to return in the backend. But let's say if we don't have that option, we have like a separate backend and we have to merge it together on the front end, we can use this operator to do so. And you can see that basically inside the get user method, we have a data, and then we just turn it into observable and return it. And same thing for comments, we have the data and we just return the the observable form of that list of comments. Now in this get comments users method, basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to use SwitchMap, and this way we first get the users, right, list of users, and then once we've done that, we can be able to return this .get comments, but we still have access to the users. So what we can do is we call this .get comments from this method, basically get a observable, and then we basically like maps. We get the comments, and then we map the entire array, and then for each comment, we basically create a basically object that it has a interface that has a type of iComment users, and then basically have username, user ID and content and name, and then we just return the data. So basically try to merge two lists of data into one list of data. Okay, so SwitchMap can allow us to do this very easily, and then what's going to happen is you can see that we're returning a list of comment users. Okay, so this way we can be able to merge two lists as one. Sorry, I mean like two lists of observables into one using SwitchMap. Okay. So now I want to talk a little more about the share operator from RxJS. So for the share operator, basically it helps us to not send duplicate calls to the API. So here you can see we have a constructor. Basically, we call this getToDos method, and this getToDo method returns the observable of list to do, and we have a to-do interface right here. And then basically we fetch data from the API, and then we return that observable, and then we assign that to request, and we pass this request to different components. Usually this method will be inside a service file, but in this demonstration purpose, we're gonna like put the send request in the component. But you can see that, let's say if we have like different components here, and then we're passing in, instead of just like a list of like to do, we're passing in a observable instead of just like to do list, right? So an array of to do, we're just gonna pass in observable. In this case, if we pass in observable and they subscribe to it, we're actually making 3 network calls instead of just 1. Even though we're just like calling this method once, we're actually getting 3 network calls. So that's not very good, because imagine in the real world we have large data, and we're sending three requests to the API for the same data, for calling the same data, for fetching the same data 3 times. So it's not really sufficient. So what we should do is we should use a share operator, and this will prevent like sending duplicate calls. So let's jump into the browser real quick to show you our current state without share operator. Now here we are at the browser, and you can see that on the if we just refresh, you can see we called 3 to do. We send 3 to do get request. So each to do get request is we send like a lot of data, and then basically it is not a very optimal solution, because we're keep sending requests to the backend to fetch the same data every single time. So it's not good. So what we need to do is we need to use a share operator. This share operator basically prevent us to make duplicate calls. And so for example, here we know that we're passing in a observable, and because they're subscribing to it and they're not like making another like get request. So let's just bring in the pipe. Now let's save, and let's jump back to, wait, hold on. What's going on? Okay. Okay, so let's save and let's jump back to the browser. Now if we refresh, you can see that we're only sending one HTTP request to get the to-dos list. So now let's talk about DebounceTime. So DebounceTime basically delayed a certain time before perform any RxJS operation. So this is very, very useful when we need to use autocomplete. Here you can see we have a input. So when I type in something, it will have a autocomplete. But first, they will take the search term, and then it will, based on the search term, it will go to the API, and then fetch those data, and then it will display those data on the autocomplete. So if I type in just random character like K, you can see that it will have nothing. Let's type in a different character. You can see we have a ton. But you can see that we're every time someone types in something, we're making a backend call. So you can see that, and then yeah, every time we're making a typing something, we're making a backend request. So obviously it is pretty normal like to have a backend request like this, but let's say we have like a ton of data, you know, this is not really like the optimal solution. So what we can do is we can use DebounceTime. And now here we add the code. We have a DebounceTime demo component. Basically inside we have a method called getTitle, and the title basically takes in the title as a string, and then basically fetch data. We make requests to this API, and then we basically, once we get the data, we will just filter it and then check to see if basically check the data with the title that contains the title that we passed in from the parameter, and then it basically just returns list of string as inobservable. So obviously this is not the way we do it in the real world. In the real world, we probably pass in like a parameter or query so that we can be able to query data and then just let the API handles what data to display, and we don't like do this on the front end. But in this case, we're just like using just a dummy API. So what we need to focus on here is we need to focus on this method right here. So you can see the search, we pass it in to the this NGB type ahead, and then what's going to happen is every time there is a text, which is observable text, we're going to get the text, get the term, and then we basically pass into this getTitle. And what we can do is we can use a DebounceTime. This way we can delay the time, a delay before getting to this SwitchMap operation. So if we use debounce time, we can pass in like a time. So for example, let's say we want to pass in 300, and then so that will be 300 milliseconds, and then it will basically it will wait this amount of time before it get to this operation, before performing this operation. Okay, so let's jump back to the front end and I'll show you our network. So now let's refresh, and basically now if we type in something, okay, so maybe there's nothing here. Okay, so as you can see, we got some requests, and then basically if we just start typing like this, like every character, it will not like send a request. It will wait till a certain time to send a request. So if I just type in like this, so you can see it waits a certain time to send the request, right? So this way it will be better, because let's say if someone wants to type really fast, and we can wait a certain time before displaying the options. Now I want to talk a little more about the take operator from RxJS. So let's say if we want to take the first couple emitted values from this method right here. So this method will emit 3 values, but we're only interested in to take the first one. So in this case, what we can do instead is we can say take 1, or I want to take the first 2, then we'll say take 2, and it will basically we will push all the values to the display array, and then it will display to the screen. So here you can see we have Eric and Tom. And now let's say if we want to only interested just the first one, we can also do 1. Now we only get 1 string, right? Now what if we want to take the last 2 values from the emitted string? For example, we want to be interested in to take Tom and Sam. Well, what we can do instead is we can say take last, and we pass in how many we want to take from the last element. So in this case 2, and then let's call it, and you will see we have Tom and Sam. Okay. And of course, there are a lot more take operators that you can use, like take until and take and all that kind of stuff. But that's it for the take section. And now we want to get into the MergeMap. So the MergeMap is very, very important. Basically combine 2 observables into one, so that we can be able to access in a object. So here you can see we have 2 observable. So one observable basically return a observable of users. So you can see we have list of users, and then we basically we pass in a parameter, user ID, which we try to find that user inside a list of users. And then here we also have observable 2. We pass in the user ID. We're trying to find reviews that are associated with this user. Okay, so you can see we have a user ID and ratings. And then the goal for the merge observable is that we want to merge the observable 1. We pass in the ID. In this case, the user ID is 1. We're trying to find this user ID and try to find this user based on the user ID we passed in. And then we also want to find all the reviews that are associated with this user. So you can see that we're using MergeMap. We first get a user, right? This user has a type of user, and then we return this dot observable number 2. We pass in the user ID, and then we basically return the map. Once we have the return the map, like return and basically get the reviews. Once we get the reviews, we have the user, and then reviews that are associated with this user. Now what we can do is we can just create an object, and then basically pass in user and reviews into this object. And then here you can see after we've done that, we basically call this merge observable method, subscribe to it, and then this data is equal to E. So E is from here, right? So E is basically the merge user review interfaces, which is right here. So it has a user, has a reviews, okay? And then we basically assign that to the data, and then we can display it in our client, okay? And then that's why you can see that we have user, name is Eric, ID is 1, reviews, so all the reviews are associated with this user, so you can see user ID is equal to 1, so, and the review ratings and all that kind of stuff. So this is very, very useful, but obviously this kind of like work is usually done in the backend, where we want to like find all the data that are associated with this user. We usually just find it in the backend. Once we get the data properly, we just return it from the backend. But in case if we have something like working with Firebase, where there's different collections, right? You have different collections. You can have users collections, reviews collections, and then all you have inside of those each user object is maybe like a variable that points to another collection. For example, the reviews. Reviews has a variable called user ID, which points to the user that create that review or associate that review. So that's one way that this merge observable, or sorry, merge map will be very, very useful. So now I want to talk about Concat. So Concat is a lot different compared to MergeMap because MergeMap we basically emit one time. So we're trying to merge all the two observable into one, and now what we do is we basically emit the data just one time, right? We basically put users and reviews and then into one object, and then we basically have a method that subscribe, and then it will only emit one time. But here it's different because here you can see we have two methods. So get numbers and get letters. We basically concat them together in order. So what's going to happen is we're going to emit twice. So after we get the data from get letters, that's one time, and it will push to this .content array. Then we have this .get numbers method. Once it returns, it basically the data will be pushed to this .content array. So we basically emit data two times, and you can see because we first emit the get letters, we have ABC. Then we emit get numbers. Then we have 1, 2, 3. Okay, so basically in Concat we're trying to combine two observable by emitting twice, by emitting more than once, and then MergeMap is basically just emit once for combining the observables. So now I want to talk a little more about ForkJoin. So ForkJoin is very similar to MergeMap and Concat. So Concat, it will emit more than once if we have more than one observables, of course. But if we have, for example, like more than one observables, Concat will be able to emit more than once. But for ForkJoin, it's not the issue. So for ForkJoin, we can be able to pass in the array of observables, and then we subscribe the array of observables, and then we return the values, the data, right? So you can see get numbers returns a observable of a string array, and then get letters basically return a observable of string array as well. And then here, after we get the data, we have an array of string array. So inside the array, we basically have string array, which is got it from the get numbers and the get get letters. And then we can, for each element in the array, we basically push the data onto this .data, and then we display it in the client. And basically, this is how we use ForkJoin. ForkJoin basically takes in an array of observables, and then basically get the data, and then return, and then assign it to the return basically in an array form.